Hey guys, human rights attorney Leigh Dundas here. I want to talk to you about the Constitution relative to Mike Pence's duties on January 6th. So I think we can all agree that the Constitution governs our great country and sort of is the backbone and framework of what we do. The Constitution is very clear that state legislatures make the rules about how elections run in their states. Not the governor, not the Secretary of State. But the state legislature sets those rules in place for the elections. So when you have states like Pennsylvania and Georgia and some of the others who said in the days leading up to election, not their legislature said, but their governors and their secretaries of state and various other people said, you know, I think we're going to keep counting votes after election day for a few days. Or I think we're going to send out ballots even if people don't ask for them. Or I don't think we really need to verify signatures after all. In those states, those little statements that they made actually contravened the actual law that had been passed by the state legislature. So to that degree, when those guys did that, they were coloring outside the lines. And when they conducted an election under those rules they had made up, they were acting unconstitutionally. They then ran an unconstitutional election, which created an unconstitutional, unlawful set of electors coming out of that state. So the Vice President of the United States is also the President of the Senate, and he alone is the one who is in charge of counting up the votes on January 6th. And it is very plausible for him to say, I am going to take constitutionally conducted electors from states that ran constitutional elections, and I'm going to subtract from this equation any electors from basically unconstitutionally run elections in Georgia, in Pennsylvania, in Michigan, in those types of states. If he did that, we would have 222 Biden votes electors versus 232 Trump. Neither one would be at the majority of 270 that we need. The 12th Amendment would get triggered. And under the 12th Amendment, we have more Republican states than Democrat states. Every state gets one vote, only one vote. You don't have all the Congress people voting. It's just one vote per state. And again, we have more Republican than Democrat states, and it would go to Trump. And could there be a challenge to the U.S. Supreme Court? Of course. I mean, anybody can try to challenge it. Pelosi and Schiff and whoever could get their panties in a twist and try to bring a challenge. But we all know at this point exactly how inclined the U.S. Supreme Court is to wade into these election waters, which is to say not at all. Now, does the pathway that I have prescribed give an absolute boatload of power to one person, aka Pence in this case, the President of the Senate, Vice President of the U.S.? Yeah, it does, and rightly so. Because our forefathers and the authors of the Constitution understood that if they granted one body of government a chance to weigh in this way on the election and another body a chance to weigh in the other way on the election, they would be setting up a tug of war, basically an endless stalemate that would never get resolved. And so what they realized is they needed to have one person, not a body, but one person who had the absolute final say. And that is the way it's set up in our country. The words of the Constitution that are relevant for this purpose, I'm going to read them to you. The President of the Senate shall, in the presence of the Senate and the House of Representatives, open all the certificates, and the votes shall then be counted. That is a very passive sentence structure at the end. The votes shall then be counted. And what one lawyer who weighed into this by way of an article stated about this sentence structure was as follows. The peculiar passive voice phrasing of this crucial sentence opens up the possibility of interpreting it to provide that the President of the Senate has the exclusive constitutional authority to determine which certificates to open and thus which electoral votes to be counted. And what history says is that this is in fact the case. Even when there is something completely wonky or weird or constitutionally defective with the slate of electors and the certificates that are sent in, one man, President of the Senate, in this case Pence, has the duty and the sole unchallenged authority to make the decision. So a couple of examples. In 1800, Thomas Jefferson was the vice president. And he was president of the Senate, and he was running in the election to become president. So he had some skin in the game. But he was also in charge as the vice president of counting all the votes. And apparently the votes coming out of Georgia, there were 4 electors at the time out of Georgia, had serious deficiencies. They were constitutionally defective on the face. The deficiency was actually announced on the floor of Congress. Everybody in Congress agreed it was defective. All of the leading newspapers of the day agreed the Georgia stuff was defective. Does this sound familiar? And what did Jefferson do? He opened up Georgia and he counted the 4 Republican votes for himself, and in so doing, he became president of the United States. One of the authors who weighed in, a guy by the name of Macris, stated, Jefferson used the, quote, unilateral and unappealable power as president of the Senate to count votes a certain way and get himself in office. And that's exactly what he did. Wisconsin, 1865, another case of this. A snowstorm delayed Wisconsin from getting their votes in, their electors in, on a timely basis. And once again, Congress was up in arms. Everybody on the floor of Congress was saying, hey, they're a day late, $1 short. We cannot count Wisconsin this time. Newspapers agreed. And the president of the Senate opened up Wisconsin, despite the fact that they were hella late, and said, I'm making the final call and I'm counting the votes. And in both of those cases, what you see is that the president of the Senate's voice was more powerful than the entire collective will of Congress. Congress, for its part, could have tried to have addressed this issue when they rewrote electoral college procedures decades and decades ago, which were after the point in time of the 2 examples I gave you, by the way. But they didn't, because they realized they could not actually overwrite the Constitution. And what they said, to the senators said on the record, I'm going to quote it for you, if the Constitution does, by fair implication, vest in the president of the Senate the power and duty not only to open, but also to count the votes, then Congress cannot, by this or any other legislation, take away or transfer to any other person or office that power and duty. Second senator weighed in and said, the Constitution says the votes shall then be counted. And if this mandate be addressed to the president of the Senate, that ends the question so far as the counting is concerned. The Constitution has entrusted him with the whole power. So again, guys, Constitution is what governs our country. Constitution allows only state legislatures to make the rules regarding how election processes in their state run. All of the swing states, for the most part, had non-legislative actions being taken by secretaries of state and governors that were illegal, unlawful, and downright unconstitutional, and saying, we're going to count every vote forever, in Pennsylvania. And those to that degree were unconstitutional elections. So on January 6th, Pence can very well open up those little envelopes, or however it goes, and based on the examples I gave you, even though Congress may well disagree and every leading newspaper may well disagree, he can say, I am not taking these votes. They're the product of an unconstitutional set of electors out of an unconstitutional election in the state. In which case, we've got the 12th Amendment. We've got more Republican states than Democrat states. Every vote gets one state, and we all know how that ends. Is Pence going to do it? I don't know. Would it polarize the country? Yes, but we're already polarized. Does our country hang in the balance? Yes, it does. We have the Director of National Intelligence who's got a report that was due on the 18th, which deadline has been missed because I'm sure they're wading through an absolute boatload of data on foreign election interference, but who has said on the record to CBS in recent days, there was foreign election interference by China, Iran, and Russia. I don't know a lot, but I know the wrong thing to do is to allow a takeover or a switching of our government by foreign interests. This is basically an attempt at an act of war, if that is in fact what happened. So this is an unusual year. Are these unusual remedies? Sure they are. Is there precedent for what I told you about? Yes, and I gave it to you. Do I know what Pence will do? No idea. But I can tell you what he said at a convention I was at 7 days ago. As our election contest continues, this was what Mike Pence said a week ago, I will make you a promise. We are going to keep fighting until every legal vote is counted. And we are going to keep fighting until every illegal vote is thrown out. I came here today to say, stay in the fight. Stay in the fight for election integrity. Stay in the fight to defend all that we have done. And referencing himself and President Trump, he said, we have fought for life and liberty and the Constitution of the United States of America. So I am telling you that the man who was in charge of the whole circus on January 6th and who has unbridled power that was given to him by our United States Constitution, the last time I saw him was talking about the United States Constitution. In closing, guys, we need to be there on January 5th and 6th in Washington, D.C. First of all, I'm going to be speaking on January 5th in front of the U.S. Supreme Court between 2 and 5 p.m., Tuesday, January 5th. But that is not why you should get yourself to Washington, D.C. You should get yourself to Washington, D.C. because your president has asked you to be there, in part to help defend our country and keep election integrity, in the works here, guys. That government that is sitting in Washington, D.C. serves at our election, okay? And Trump has asked you to go. And as anybody who's ever stolen a cookie from a cookie jar or done something else that you weren't proud of or that your conscience said not to do, you and I both know it is much easier to do wrong when nobody is watching you. It is much, much harder to do the wrong thing when you've got hundreds or thousands, or in this case, millions of sets of eyes watching you. We need to be outside the Capitol January 5th and 6th. We need to be out there en masse, okay? We have a job to do. It is our job to hold government accountable next week. It is our job to keep the republic. If you're not familiar with the story about Ben Franklin, he had walked out one day after doing some government work, and a lady approached him and said, "So, sir, what do we have, a republic or a monarchy?" And Ben Franklin looked at her and he said, "A republic, if you can keep it." So what do you say, guys? I say we keep the republic, and I will see you in D.C. January 5th and 6th.